Another international tournament and another series of stomps and humiliations for the Western teams, barely managing a single fluke win here and there, with only G2 being even remotely competitive. Like every time after such an event, naturally the discussion starts again. Why is it that the Eastern teams are so much better in seemingly every facet of the game? Stronger laning, which results in leads that should never be possible, superior team fighting, enabling teams to come back from incredible deficits, and so much more. Going into international tournaments, the cycle is eerily similar every time, starting out quite hopeful, hearing some news about really promising scrim results.
我听说啊，欧美的队伍训练赛无敌，现在就是欧洲队伍那几个队伍训练赛无敌，具体我也不能讲，但是好像他们有点猛。
Then, some team starts the tournament with a slight overperformance, often thanks to strong meta read or just some good early game planning and sequences, and suddenly everybody thinks, oh, maybe there is a chance, maybe something can happen.
Oh, we're gonna get top tier 2 as well. This is it! We should have IE on Jinx in base. Caps can TP to Drake. Shun's dead for 10. Nice, BB. Mark him. Watch out for the tornado. Nice, get the jacks, get the reset. Look for Aphelios. No flash. Yike, get the ult. Boom, get the stun. Boom, get the kill. Boom! That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about.
All that hope, all that anticipation, just for it to slip away in a single moment, giving way to a return to the unforgiving reality.
What the fuck just happened? Elk's dead! Keep Pants alive! No, Elk's alive! Oh my god, Wukong at GA. No. Can Yike get a kill? No, he got polymorphed!
And BLG punish G2 Esports! How? That is a heartbreaking mistake to come through the moment that Darius isn't in the
What just happened?
So, why are these teams so much better? What are their advantages and what can be done to beat them? Let's first look at some of the reasons why the average Korean or Chinese pro will be a better player individually than their Western counterpart. One fact that is undeniable is that ordinarily the amount of time spent on improving and practicing the game is higher in the East, having a much more demanding schedule, all for the sake of achieving their greatest self, sacrificing other things in the process. Higher amount of hours doesn't necessarily mean higher amount of effective practice, since there will be diminishing returns in terms of concentration and knowledge retention over time. But without a doubt, extensive repetition aids in the formation of muscle memory when it comes to playing out different kind of matchups and mechanics of champions. Having played specific matchups countless of times results in more consistent mechanical performance on average. It's different from player to player how much practice they need on a champion to perform on the necessary level, but on some more demanding champion it will be unavoidable. What this consequently also can help with is a bigger functional champion pool, since in theory with more time spent, of course you are able to practice more champions to the desired proficiency. There is a big difference in games needed to master a champion. Some require hundreds of games, while others could be borderline first-timed, depending on player tendencies and experience. As a result, more options in draft open up, not having to worry about a player not being able to play important meta picks. This doesn't mean that it never happens that a player is unable to pick up a champion, but it happens far less compared to most Western players. In some cases I'm still waiting to ever see a player perform on a world-class level on the pick. For example, Fiora comes to mind, where there is just no Western player that is good enough on the champion for it to be a worthwhile pick on the world stage, even in its strongest state. Finally, what ends up happening is we get a fundamental advantage from the start, where any Eastern team will be in a commanding position before the game starts. So Kashi, why don't Western pros just practice 18 hours a day? Then they would be just as good, right? Well, it's not that simple. As I said, there are multiple reasons. Some teams in the past tried to practice just as much, following a rigid and demanding scrim regimen, and still failed miserably in the end. The next point interlinks with the first. They don't only practice more, the quality is also much higher with the closer location to their respective servers, leading to lower ping, which enables practicing some specific champions to a much higher level by default, like let's say Ezreal or Fiora, who require an immense amount of precision to play them close to perfection. The level of mastery some of the one tricks can get there is truly incredible. Also, practicing between regions is a possibility, with Korea and China not being that far apart, which results in a bigger pool of teams to choose from in terms of scrimming, and an even higher level of solo queue, with Chinese players being able to play on the Korean server with serviceable ping or vice versa. For Western players, this is simply impossible, and looking at NA, it is even hard for talents of their own region to play under acceptable circumstances, since the server can't cover the whole region. One solution that came up is Champions Queue, which, while being a noble attempt, failed in its implementation, and to be honest, only helps so much, since up-and-coming players don't have access and still have to grow up under inferior conditions. Another point I want to make is the cultural one, where esports is much more ingrained in Korea and China compared to the West. Children playing games together in PC banks when growing up, socializing and aspiring to be professional players early on, with pretty cheap access, not even in need of a PC at home. Of course, studying and similar paths are more popular, but it is a real possibility to set out trying to become a pro player with clear systems on how to advance. Even sometimes being supported by parents, as we could see recently when looking at one of the up-and-coming AD carry stars in Korea, which is Pace, who got private in-house tutoring to progress him to the next level in solo queue and help him get scouted by Genji in the process. This is completely unthinkable in the West and a result of an esports culture going back to around 1995, where the first PC banks opened up in Korea, which then really rose in popularity with the release of StarCraft, the first big esport. With esports being disingrained in the minds of young kids early on, this cultivates a more extensive competitive player base from where talents can be drawn from. China has by far the biggest player base with around 27 servers, while North America has the lowest population, especially in terms of ranked players, compared to the other regions. But the Eastern esports culture does not only bring in a stronger player base, better infrastructure is also a factor where most of the teams have fantastic modern facilities with coaches that have experience from past esports titles, and in the case of LPL, even teams with their own stadiums. This brings optimized conditions for the players to reach their full potential and succeed on every level. So all of this creates players with such a strong base ability and an inherent advantage in their formation. Combine that with at this point better teamfighting and objective setups, how can the Western teams even compete against this? The way it is now, 99% of Western teams are just an inferior version of Korean and Chinese teams, constantly trying to copy them and their way of playing. It's the same approach every year. There are no answers, no ideas, and if they ever start to appear ever so slightly, they are quickly phased out, sometimes even under mysterious circumstances. I believe from time to time, looking at the past can help to see if there is a connection to be made between the past successes of Western teams. So let's take a quick look. I think some of the strongest Western teams we've ever had, who actually managed to win something, and in completely different timelines, are G2 in 2019, who won MSI and made World Finals, and way further back, Moscow 5 or later Gambit Gaming in 2012 up to, I would say, early 2013. And what they had in common is both these teams were ahead of their time in certain strategic concepts of the game. They were not strictly following what the perceived strongest team was doing, they were finding their own ways. G2 had the best side laning in the world, with Perks and Wonder understanding how to use their timers and waves perfectly, making it possible for them to come back from considerable deficits, having their opponent constantly on the edge of their seat. The way they faked recoil timings to disrupt the tempo of their opponents was truly ahead of their time, denying retaking of parts of the map and in consequence set plays that should have been possible. M5 on the other hand was revolutionizing how to use their jungler in interaction with their laners, primarily top lane. Their understanding of wave states and how to use their priority correctly was really phenomenal for its time. In addition, both teams had unique picks that strengthened their philosophies and made it difficult for other teams to instinctively know how to react to them. At least the second point, we could see somewhat in the past from other teams that clearly overperformed, like Misfits at 2017 Worlds, bringing their own unique take on the Ardent Sensor meta back then, where every team was playing Enchanter supports, mainly because the item was just broken, giving way too much for way too little cost. AD carries even started to buy Relic Shield just to funnel the item into their supports as quickly as possible. But Misfits recognized that this doesn't play to the strength of their team and their support player Igna at all, so they put him on engaged champions while finding other spots like mid or jungle where they could put the item on. This completely shifted the basis on how the game is played, since engaged supports enable different ways to approach situations, which SKT back then was not used to. They nearly managed to win 3-1 until a certain incident.
And again, SKT step forward. He's gonna go down if they can get the chomp onto him. It has been knocked. Ignar is in the back. Bang has to retreat from the fight. They're able to take down Max Lord. They didn't have minions when they started the fight, and they didn't get much damage onto the turret. Still trying to turn. They keep losing members. Faker tries to go to the back as Ignar stops him with what he can.
So, coming up with your own ideas and your own concepts is extremely important to break off patterns that the other teams are used to, especially against Korean teams which are usually quite rigid in their approach. Disturbing and breaking their way of playing is needed, simply copying the top Asian teams will always leave you a step behind. To make a quick football analogy, the way to beat Prime Barcelona was not leaning into their style of play of football with a high line, possession and control, which they were the masters at. It is to find a way to break their play pattern and innovate something they don't have built-in answers to. Riot kind of limited options quite a bit, thanks to the Dragon Soul mechanic, which kind of forces teamfighting, but I believe there are still areas unexplored, and at least in Europe with the format changes, playing more best of series gives more flexibility on trying things out, which I think will pay off in the future. Effective use of scrims will also be crucial to facilitate that process, since it has to be something that is not easy to replicate in a short time frame. All of this completely meaningless though, if the players are fundamentally too far below their Korean and Chinese counterparts. So an extensive bootcamp in one of the regions prior to any international event is absolutely mandatory to raise the individual level as much as possible. It is unrealistic to fully match the best Eastern players, but we can get close enough. Multiple statements from coaches and players alike reveal that every international tournament, top Western teams arrive with quite a deficit and scrims usually are looking very rough, with them being outclassed in many basic aspects of the game, having to adapt and learn in a short time frame. Suddenly, matchups that at home went really well started becoming unplayable, which can shift the whole game flow, and small mistakes that usually go unpunished will be abused mercilessly.
When I was playing scrims against Show in 2020, I was getting clapped. I was getting clapped 90% of games.
What can happen then is a mentality problem starting to creep in, where players start feeling inferior and hopeless, putting them in a defeatist mindspace and mentality, which then in turn affects their confidence negatively. The result is players that make uncharacteristic mistakes and play even worse than they should. In consequence, one last point that I want to make is that the mentality and psychology of the players is also really important. A team that doesn't believe in themselves being able to win any game disregarding of the opponent is already in a losing position before the match even started. Sometimes in interviews at Worlds or MSI, I see players saying things like, I'm just happy to be here, I'm so happy that we qualified, let's try, maybe we can win a game, we will see. And all of this already shows me a terrible mindset, not truly believing in themselves. Belief and confidence have to be drawn from somewhere, of course. You cannot fake it very well. But scrim results cannot affect their self-worth and their self-belief as a pro player, as well as the trust in their teammates. This is something where coaches can make a big difference. Watching from the outside, I think a lot of coaches in the West can still make improvements in that department. So, these are some of the points I wanted to make. The West has to innovate new concepts and break common patterns, to find edges somewhere. Currently, there is no other way to fight against these inherent deficiencies, and if nothing changes, the East will forever reign supreme. If you made it here and enjoyed the video, I clearly deserve a like and subscription, so go ahead and press that button. See you in the next one.